Hi and welcome everyone to this expert guide launch and presentation to dig into Altiorum's latest expert guide on starting in and transitioning into sustainable finance careers. Thanks to those who are able to join us today or those watching online. Here's just some house rules. We'll get you to keep your microphones off, but we do want your interaction later with your Q&A, so please add them throughout the webinar and we'll come to them and make sure there's time for it. And of course, if you don't already use Altiorum and haven't joined as a member, please do after this, get online, explore and join up with Altiorum. It's a brilliant resource for anyone starting or well and truly within the field of sustainable finance. Today, we have a great agenda on a really important topic on how we get into this whole field of sustainable finance. And there's lots of us, those of us in the field talk to frequently about how you do this and wanting to move into this field, this subset of finance, or more broader corporate responsibility that's focused on sustainability, ESG, climate change, and other really important issues. So we're going to dig into that. We'll introduce the panelists. We will give an overview of the expert guide that we're launching today, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and really hear from people who have been deep in the field and carving their careers in this field, and keep time for the Q&A. Let me introduce our speakers today. So Georgie Murray, who was the lead author and lead expert on this guide. Georgie is an associate director at Pollination, which is a global climate change and natural capital investment and advisory firm, formerly sustainability investment analyst, formerly marketing exec with UNICEF Australia. And you're going to see there's a bit of a theme here that everyone's careers are a little bit colourful in the field of sustainable finance and often have interesting pathways. So Alexandra Brown, we're stoked also to have here, who's a founder of Altiorum, a consultant and an ethical investment financial advisory specialist who leads the ethical investment group, who helps financial advisors move into the field and build their practices around ethical investment, who also was a former head chef. Then we have Pablo Baruti, who's the founder of Altiorum and also a long-time sustainable finance expert in Australia and globally, also a beer brewer and a hospitality expert. And myself, Simon, so I wear a few hats. I'm on the board of Altiorum. I'm a pretty ordinary baker. I'm on a bank board. I was once working in a nursery, and I'm an economist and have worked as a sustainability investment analyst as well. So there's going to be a theme that we draw out over the course of today. I want to really start by saying these expert guides are built by the community that sits around Altiorum, and the community is one of the really brilliant assets that Altiorum brings together. So we've got a number of people who have contributed to the guide as our leading expert, Georgie, who's going to present on the guide, the Altiorum team who's supported this, the research associates and interns, which is Catherine, Lady, who's led on this work as well. And then a whole lot of people who have shared their insights and contributed to the development of these guides. So I just want to say a big thanks to all of those who have played a part in bringing this together. Okay, so the expert guide. I'm going to now hand over to Georgie, who's going to give us an overview of this guide and talk you through it. So thanks, Georgie.
Thanks so much, Simon. I just would like to say at the outset, as you mentioned, Simon, this has been a huge effort by a range of people. So I can take no credit for actually putting this together, and it's been a huge community effort, which is the basis for Altiorum, which is an amazing community of people. So the who, what, why, and why not, the barriers and the how of this guide. While sustainable finance is steadily growing, it can still be a rather difficult field to build a career in. And this is why we've put this guide together, and it's due to a range of different factors, including the nuances and the complexity of the sustainable finance practice, also due to the variation in roles and titles and expectations across different regions, and the evolving definitions of what actually constitutes sustainability in financial contexts. And that is why we've actually put this together to help you navigate entry into this space, no matter where you are within your career. So as you can see here, who is this guide for? It's primarily designed for students, those early career professionals, also experienced practitioners who are exploring or trying to look to change their roles into sustainable finance careers. The guide actually looks for a pathway for building a purpose-driven career at a time when ESG values and sustainability objectives are really being redefined in this financial landscape. If we jump to the next slide, please. So through this guide, we've actually also explored this key concept of what sustainable finance is. And it refers to including ESG factors in financial decisions so that investments can deliver returns while also supporting long-term resilience and positive impact. And the guide goes into quite a lot of detail here about exploring this further, as well as actually how roles fit into this sustainable finance space through environment, social, and also governance, the three key pillars of sustainable finance. The next one, thanks. The guide then goes into actually quite a lot of detail about why sustainable finance matters now. And putting capital behind decarbonisation in particular and social challenges has never mattered more, as we're at a key crossroads in society that's really coming to a head. And this really includes how a key financial issue of sustainability is now. Secondly, as you can see, how regulation and markets are really shifting, so much so that we now have mandatory climate disclosure in place in a lot of markets. Thirdly, there's a real demand growing for people and skills in the market. And lastly, how much finance shapes real-world outcomes with capital flowing as a powerful lever. And if we go to the next one. Despite this, there's still some barriers to growth in the sustainable finance space. So this really includes some key knowledge gaps. There's some short-termism in decision-making. We've seen some political pushback, particularly what we've seen in the US over the last year. Some inconsistent data, particularly when it comes to reporting and regulation. Sometimes some limited career visibility, which we'll probably explore in a bit more detail today, and then the structural constraints. Last slide. So then lastly, the guide really explores the how. So how do you actually start or transition into this space? And we've provided quite a bit of detail on the advice and the recommendations on how to actually make this transition. So we really recommend building foundational knowledge in sustainable finance and how you can actually upskill. This leads on to developing relevant and transferable skills that you might have within a previous career or a previous role, how you can then actually leverage these transition strategies. Building networks is really key, and actually understanding and meeting key people, assessing role and organisational fits, and then lastly, really cultivating continuous learning, which you can do throughout your whole career. So that's a really quick snapshot of the guide, and I'll pass back to Simon for the next step.
Brilliant. Thank you, Georgie. That very quick snapshot holds a lot of content and context for people trying to move into this field. And I guess why Altiorum has developed this, and we all experience this as people working in this field, is we speak to a lot of young people, either working in roles in their careers who would like to transition to other parts of their organisation working on ESG and sustainability issues, or indeed young graduates, people studying undergraduate, wondering how they move into this field. And so this guide is rich with details and insights for those interested in doing this. But what we want to do over the next sort of 15 or so minutes is dig into a few practitioners here to sort of understand their pathway into this field. Because one thing sustainable finance is not is homogenous in any way, and every role is quite different, and every pathway into those roles is quite different. And so this will give you a bit of a flavour and a taste for how the three panelists, and I might even jump in a bit myself too, if I'm allowed, sort of have navigated our ways into this, because it's not a clear set path. There's not. It's a newer and evolving field that has less of that traditional formal education pathways into it. But what we know is there's a lot of people who want to work in this field, and what we know also is there's a lot of businesses looking for people with skills in this area. So we really want to help to marry those up. So what I thought we'd start with is actually asking our panelists to give us a bit of an insight, the short version of their own path into sustainable finance, just to give you a flavour of that diversity. And so maybe, Alexandra, can I start with you to give a little bit of the short story of your move into sustainable finance?
Yes, thank you, Simon. You mentioned in the intro that I was a chef. And so, you can imagine going from chef to finance, it's a real natural progression. It wasn't. But as a chef, which I was for over a decade, I knew that I did want to learn about finance. So back in 2010, I took myself off to university and studied business and finance. And back then, finance was literally one paragraph in one textbook. Sustainable finance, sorry, was one paragraph, one textbook. So we didn't really get introduced to it. I found out when I was applying for a job with a super fund, I looked at their options, saw that there was a socially responsible investment option. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can actually marry my values with finance, which was a huge revelation for me at the time. And I went to an investing conference. I was speaking to people, networking, met with an advisor who invited me out for lunch. This advisor specialized in ethical investing, employed me to become a financial advisor. I resigned because I didn't want to be a financial advisor, although I love them, respect them. And he offered instead for me to stay on as a consultant and on his investments committee. And that was 10 years ago now. And that's how I began in consulting. And then as my knowledge grew, I started teaching about this because I could see the value of improving the capability of investors and advisors. So I've been training and running courses for about 5 years now too.
Brilliant. Maybe I'll hand to you, Georgie. Do you want to give us a bit of the potted history of your sort of career evolution to date?
Sure. Thanks, Simon. So I, as you mentioned, started my career in the not-for-profit industry at UNICEF Australia. And this was primarily due to a values alignment and my study in international aid. And I, to be honest, just fell into some conversations with people who worked in sustainable finance. And I honestly just was like, this is an amazing world. How have I never heard about impact investing and ESG? And I was like, why has no one ever told me about this? And I honestly just really fell in love with what they were talking about and was determined to work in this world. And so I spent a good year talking with people, doing some short courses, and wanted to work in a fund, which is eventually how I was able to get into that through talking with people and through those short courses, which led to where I am today at Pollination, which is where I do a combination of work with financial institutions, which is sustainable finance work, and then do some broader consulting work, which is more aligned with sustainability objectives more broadly. So I feel very fortunate that I sort of fell into it, not even knowing that it existed when I was younger, which is, yeah, my story.
Thanks, Georgie. And Pablo, how about you?
So I before starting on that, I was one of those people that were fortunate enough to meet Georgie way back when she was looking, and she missed one really important thing, was that Georgie also volunteered to as an early contributor to Altiorem. She was one of our very first volunteers, and I think when you're thinking about getting into this space, putting a bit of yourself out there and dedicating a bit of time to try and learn things and contribute to the broader makeup of the industry, whether it's working groups or things like Altiorem, are a valuable way to build some experience. So for me, I was a risk manager, and my job in managing risk included all sorts of different things, but didn't include anything to do with ESG or anything like that. In my personal life, I was really passionate about, particularly around climate change, and was really concerned about that issue. And there was a moment in sort of 2006 or so where Inconvenient Truth came out, and Al Gore, and it just became really apparent to me that climate change posed risks and financial risks. And my company, the one that I was working at, and my job as a risk manager just didn't look at them at all. And so I started talking to people internally. I was really politely ignored for about 2 years. So I was very persistent. You have to keep having that conversation. I volunteered to do things, so Carbon Disclosure Project, or CPD as it's now known. So I volunteered to do the CPD for the firm because they weren't really interested in doing it that much at the time. And I said, I'll put my hand up and do that in my own time. And I also studied a graduate certificate in sustainability, and I made a decision around, do I want to study something which is more pertinent to the issues that I was concerned with, or to deepen my knowledge on finance and investment. And I thought to differentiate and to actually offer something that would be different to what other people within the organisation have, the sustainability pathway was the way to go. That then turned into a role, long story short, which then has led to a career which has been incredibly fulfilling. It is challenging and frustrating at times, but I've had the great pleasure to work with an incredible community of people who are all trying to make the industry better and make the world better through their work.
That's brilliant. And maybe I'll just chime in too, because there are a few common themes there. And I was studying economics as my undergrad at university, but got really passionate about the environment and thought, how the hell does economics and environment come together? And so I went on and did some postgraduate certificate in environmental science. I think that might help the complementary skills, but there still wasn't really a path that brought them together. And so I sort of jumped around with some work in environmental consulting to industry and some investment analysis work, and then found myself in an environmental NGO as an economist at the Australian Conservation Foundation. And through that started working with finance, because I kind of recognised the important role finance has in shaping the economy and where money's invested. And so I really got excited about that, and then moved from that into leading the Responsible Investment Association for a decade or so in that role. And so it was, again, just finding a way of sort of building on different skills, but not really knowing where that would lead me, I guess, in many ways. And I think that many of us in this field have sort of not really known what the next step will be, but have, pleasingly found ourselves in this, like Pablo said, really satisfying area to work in. And maybe, Pablo, back to you. So in your sort of funds management role, like what does a day in the life of a sustainable finance person look like in practice?
So it's incredibly varied depending on what you do. So I was formerly a head of responsible investment for a large asset management organization, and in those roles, there is a high degree of how do you fit the consideration of sustainability issues in the investment practice into the governance frameworks of the firm. So that you'd have individual investment teams, and so you'd be looking to say, well, we need to report up to boards on what are the risks associated with each of the investment teams' investments, what processes do they adopt. So there's a big governance dimension of that. There's building strategy, and strategy will involve things like capacity building, so education within the organization. It'll involve things like how do you improve the investment processes with all of the different investment teams. And that means working very closely with investment teams to understand their processes and philosophies, and being able to integrate then more, might be ESG ratings or data into their processes, or it might be tweaking the way that they assess companies and investments and supporting them in developing the tools to do that. Then there's the support for things like corporate engagement. So if you're investing in companies, you want to engage with those companies, be a good steward, and try and encourage them to better practice. And so we would support the investment teams in doing that type of work. And lastly, sorry, not lastly, there's two other things. But the second last was reporting, because if you're doing this type of work within an organization, you're trying to build organizational capability, you need to be able to tell your clients and your other stakeholders what it is that you're doing. And you need to do that in a way that is not greenwashing. And back when I was doing this type of work, it wasn't a term that was commonly used, greenwashing, but it's become a thing, obviously. So being very transparent but clear and not over egging what you're doing is incredibly important. And then the last bit is the industry piece, because none of these issues resolve themselves by any individual organization or any individual person working on their own. So those types of organizations like the Responsible Investment Association, investor group on climate change, principles for responsible investment, are really vital in terms of bringing investors together to improve practice. It still is really, I think, an emerging area in broader finance. It's developed a whole lot over the course of the last 20 years, but there's still a long way to go. And so that ability to collaborate and work together is essential. And in terms of career building, like just to go back to the purpose of this guide, volunteering time to work on working groups at the Responsible Investment Association, to be on the board of those. So I was volunteered to be on the board way back when, and was fortunate to do that. Attending working groups, like all of those types of things are really, really vital for building skills, because there may not be the formal training available that you need that's specific to your job. Just quickly, sorry, on another role that I had more recently, which is as an analyst, that is really analyzing companies. And so getting away from that really broad, I wanted to move away from that broad organizational, cross-organizational work that I was doing, and really get close to the investments that we were making and the companies that we were investing in. And that role as an analyst involved really picking companies apart and trying to understand, well, what are their material risks and issues that they face from a sustainability standpoint? So do they have supply chain issues, human rights concerns? Is it climate because they're high carbon emitters, or a range of different potential risks? But also, how is it that their business models are driving better outcomes and more sustainable outcomes in the world? And so the obvious example is sort of a fossil fuels versus renewable energy, but within that, there's a whole lot of nuance. And it's really, as an analyst, trying to really pick apart where the company sits within that broader picture of what a more sustainable economy looks like, and how it can benefit and contribute to getting us to that more sustainable economy, and how that then influences your decision making from a financial as well as a non-financial perspective. So you can go from the big airy stuff around governance and frameworks to really deep company level analysis. That's how diverse the types of roles can be.
I was going to say, listening to that, that's a huge portfolio of activities that you'll be tasked with in a role like that. And that's both maybe daunting, but I think also kind of really stimulating and exciting too, in terms of the exposure you get. You're never on one task, day in, day out, which I guess is probably one of the stimulating and satisfying parts of working in this field. Georgie, does that sort of ring true to you? Do you have a similar kind of portfolio of things? Every day is a different issue. How does it look in your day in the life for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think what Pablo said about, never a day is the same. It is totally true for me. And I think my role at Pollination as an associate director, which essentially means a consultant, is probably not a true sustainable finance role. It's a lot more broad than that, in the sense that I work across a whole range of sectors and industries. And I think, the three most recent projects I've worked on have been across three completely different industries. And I think just illustrating that can show you how varied the work is that I do. So, for example, one of the most recent one I've done is working with one of Australia's largest banks on their climate strategy. And so that's working with the C-suite and the board, essentially because of investor pressure, to be honest. So that's from the flip side of sustainable finance, to be honest, to set up their governance structures to help them actually, from the top down and the bottom up, develop that climate strategy which fits within their existing strategy structure. So we helped them do that over a period of quite a long time, because in a large organisation that takes quite a long time. Another project that I've been working on is a lot more granular. It was with a food and beverage business doing a climate risk and opportunity assessment, which essentially looks at all of the ingredients that go into their supply chain, all of their operating sites, and understanding where the risks from a climate perspective are. And that looks at physical and transition risks, and that will actually feed into an ASRS disclosure document next year for them. So a very different type of project. And then another project that I've been working on is actually with a very large emitting fossil fuel company, helping them to understand in 10, 20 years' time where their stranded assets will be, how they can change their business model. And this again is actually due to huge amounts of investor pressure, because the investors are not happy with their climate transition plan and what they actually can do to change their business model over time. Very, very hard questions to answer, very difficult problem-solving skills to bring to that sort of project. But essentially that's sort of the work that Pollination does. You know, three very different projects. There's a heap of other projects that would sit within there. And obviously day to day looks very, very different, but that's sort of the work that I do sometimes, and a heap of other stuff as well.
Great. Intellectually challenging and stimulating and varied. So, Alexandra, how does it look for you working more maybe on the financial advice side? Does it look very different, or do you have a similar sort of things of a diversity of day-to-day work?
It's very diverse, which is something that I really love. And obviously, predominantly my business is running courses and teaching. So a lot of my time is spent making sure that I stay up to date on the latest research and what's going on in the industry, because I want the courses to be very practical. So I'm always looking for new resources and new tools to share with advisors and investors. And one of the ways I do that is through Altiorem. It absolutely keeps me up to date on a lot of those things, and also subscriptions as well. So things that land in my inbox, Altiorem has a great roundup as well. So things that make my job easier like that are always very well received. But I actually have a lot of meetings. So I spend a lot of time with industry and networks, whether that be RIA or Ethical Advisors Co-op, other advisors, product providers, like all just to keep my knowledge fresh, but also fintech and solution providers as well, because I'm kind of an intermediary between the industry and advisors and what have you. So I can speak with these new impact rating agencies or fintechs, and then share that knowledge with advisors. So that is a really big part of what I do as well. Community is exceptionally important to me. As part of the advisor course, there's a community attached to that. So I'll do weekly check-ins that facilitates peer-to-peer support. And I just think that community is just really important in this space, because it is always evolving, and listening to the learned experience is just incredibly helpful. I majored in marketing as well. So I'm an entrepreneur, so I do have to be across all the marketing things as well. So a lot of my time is spent creating social media. I'm currently recording a podcast for individuals to be released next year. And yeah, just reviewing the current course content and constantly updating that. So it's really varied, and it's really exciting to be able to, have something different every day and really fresh. It's great.
Excellent. That gives you a really good flavour, I think, and is really representative of what you hear in the sustainable finance field, of lots of diverse skills being required and applied. And I guess the question then comes from that, what are the skills that have mattered most in your career to build a career in sustainable finance? And maybe I'll ask this as a two-part, and then thinking about it from someone else who's transitioning from another field, what are those sort of experiences or skills that help build credibility when you're going for a job or trying to move into this field? So the two parts that, what are the skills that really mattered most, and what advice, I guess, can you bring for others transitioning into this field to show that credibility if they're one and the same? Alex, do you have a view on those?
Yeah, I do. I think when it comes to skills, like from my experience anyway, the two skills that I've needed the most are research and communication. And particularly research, there's such a vast amount out there. And I think, over time I've learned, because I've just the sheer volume of it and speaking to industry experts, what I can discern between what's credible and what's not. And so I think having good research skills is great. And then as you learn on the job, you'll be able to discern between credible and not so credible research. And the communication side of things, being able to communicate, it takes the right words, but it also takes supporting evidence as well. And so I think the other skill is building a bank of that supporting evidence. Again, I know I'm biased, but to mention Altiorem again, it's just, that was one of the purposes of Altiorem, was to create that the ease to collect that supporting evidence. So I think, yeah, research and communication. And if you're transitioning into the field, I think things like getting additional training and certificates is very helpful. Memberships and associations, which can also, can be low cost as well. Things like Finding Nature and the other groups that meet up where you're going to be meeting with other experts. Any kind of extracurricular activity that's to do with sustainability will lead on to a network, but also the potential for getting referrals into the industry as well. So
that's great. Georgie, how about from your perspective, what are those skills that have really been most transferable as you transition through these different jobs over your career?
Yeah, I think, Alexandra, I completely agree with everything that you've just said. But I also think, to add on to that, I think some of the softer skills as well have been really important and mattered in my career as well. So things like organizational skills, project management, stakeholder engagement skills have really helped me. And obviously they're a little bit of a softer skill that are harder to sort of measure and learn, but those sort of skills that you learn on the job can really help you manage multiple projects at one time, or multiple stakeholders if you've got lots of them engaging with you at one time. So I think that's really helped me across multiple different types of jobs over the past few years. I think for someone transitioning from another field, which I've done twice now, I think it's been really helpful for me to be open-minded and ready to learn, and not being too stuck in my own ways. And so particularly when I shifted from the not-for-profit industry to finance, being just sort of ready to absorb everything and adaptable and agile was really key to learning the ways of the new business, to learning finance and ESG finance as well. And while I didn't have the traditional finance skills, I think that just helped me learn exponentially and not be stuck in my own ways. Obviously, learning hard skills is really important as well, but I think that mindset shift can really help you upskill quite quickly as well in a new job.
Hey, Georgie, so what was it that you could bring as your experiences to build credibility when you're moving from marketing NGO into more sustainable finance? Like what were you drawing on to be able to say, hey, I can do this, even though it doesn't look like it in the traditional sense of, any insights there?
Yeah, I think when because I had been at my previous not-for-profit role for, I can't remember how many years now, quite a few years, and I'd shifted roles within the company a number of times, I think I'd been able to show that agility and ability to learn different skills and different types of jobs because I'd done it previously. And so I think that level of credibility was just evident because of what I'd done previously. And I think as well, sometimes you can just show that through the way that you speak and the way that you're able to learn. And I think even what Pablo and Alexandria have said previously, being involved in Altiorum actually helped me a lot with my sustainability knowledge and sustainable finance knowledge, just to be able to talk the talk a little bit more. So when I instantly entered, I just had that sort of background knowledge that just helped me not sound like an absolute idiot, and just was able to be a little bit more knowledgeable as well.
It's really interesting, this idea of that comes up in the guide of the transferability of skills.
Yeah.
And I think sustainable finance is, as it's not a defined single role, it's all about being able to sort of demonstrate that the skills you have are transferable to be applied in this area. And I think that was a great sort of example of that, Georgie, your agility, your ability to take on new roles, to shift, to be applying your intelligence, your ability to work with stakeholders, with other partners, and then sort of apply that. So that's really, really helpful. And I think that's, I've had a number of conversations with people who say, I couldn't possibly apply for that position because it says you need to have experience in ESG. And it's like, well, sometimes a position description says that, but actually they want someone who's smart enough to be able to pick up and apply research and synthesis and analysis to different subject matter areas, because none of us can be experts in all of the subjects that we're expected to be within sustainable finance. Human rights one day, biodiversity the next, climate the next. And so it's the ability to sort of apply our analytical skills and our research skills now. So that's great. Thank you. That's really helpful insights. And Pablo, how about you? What skills have kind of mattered most as you've navigated your way through this field? Muted.
It had to happen at least once, and I'm glad it was me. So I think like in this space, you have to have a lot of adaptability because the issues are changing all of the time. Georgie mentioned the political pushback in the US. The way that the field is perceived is changing all of the time. Organizational approach is changing. Good practice is evolving all of the time. So being able to shift as things are moving around you, multiple things are moving around you, is really important. Client demand for and expectations shift all of the time, and so all of those things are things which are going to keep you on your toes, and you need to be able to incorporate that. There's no way that you can do this if you're really stuck in your ways and only want to do it in one way and never change. I think for me, because of the nature of the way that my roles have evolved, being able to communicate well to different types of people mattered a lot, because I clearly, like in my heart of hearts and soul of souls, like I want a better world for my children, and all children. I'd like to see us manage and work through these issues in a way that can deliver a better future for everybody. But that's not the way that all people in our sector see the world. A lot of them just see the world in that they are there to make money for their clients, and that's all they really want to do, and they don't really care about the sustainability issues. And so for someone like me, I have to be able to have a conversation with someone who has an almost opposite view and try and make the issues that I'm concerned about relevant to them. And the only way you do that is if you speak to them in their language. And so having that ability of non-judgment, of acceptance, of really trying to understand where they're coming from, and then being able to apply your knowledge of the issues that you're trying to integrate into this system, and translate that is really, really important. Another just one that I mentioned as well is that integrating diverse sources of information into and synthesizing, which you mentioned, Simon, is incredibly important, because these issues are complex, they are evolving. How they relate to individual companies or sectors within the economy also change over time. The standards are evolving all of the time. So you really need to be able to draw a few threads together to come up with a coherent story around why this is important for a particular company or a particular investment decision. But I think increasingly, so when I started in this space, you might have one, if you're lucky, you might have two people working in the ESG responsible investment team in an organization, even in very large organizations. And so you did have to do everything, like it was, as I described earlier, in terms of what a day in the life was in the past. Nowadays, those teams are much larger, and there are much more specialized roles. And so I really think any type of person with a particular skill set could apply those in a sustainable. So if you're really analytical and you really like diving deep on the detail, if you're great with numbers, there are ESG analyst roles that are perfect for you. If you're more strategic, if you're more looking at organizational change, if you're a great communicator, there are roles that are right for you. And one of the things that is helpful in that regard is really trying to understand how what you're currently doing will relate to the types of roles that you might apply for. And one of the best ways to do that is to apply those principles of sustainability into what you're doing today, because I think that's the very first step to prove up that you're suitable for other roles. Like when you said about demonstrating ESG experience is often a line in a job description. My personal experience was, the way I did that was as a risk manager, is I started doing sustainability work, even though no one asked me to, and just do it for practice, do it to get better. But eventually that got recognized as being, oh, this is actually really important, we should be doing more of that, and Pablo has the skills, let's bring him across. So I think that do it in your own role first, and then you'll find ways that you can extend that into specialist roles in the future, if that's the way you want to go.
Yeah, that's a brilliant set of insights. Thank you. There's a lot in that. And I think that summary that you don't have to be every part of every potential part of that sort of sustainable finance role anymore, and you can find the skills that you have to transfer into this area much more today than maybe previously. Maybe the other things that come to mind that I think what's been important is sort of not to be scared. I like get your head around the commercial and the quantifiable elements of the ESG field as well, and be able to sort of frame up sustainability issues in commercial terms or commercial terminology to sort of build that credibility. As a big part of our job is often to influence people in more kind of maybe mainstream finance roles or mainstream commercial roles. And so that ability to kind of build the bridge between the sustainability issue and how that impacts on commercial terms and commercial outcomes is a really important thing. And that sort of builds in not just the ability to be financially literate, but also the communication skills and being able to talk about things in terms that are relevant to your audience. And so I think that's always been a big part of it for me, is knowing how to sort of talk about the issues I'm really passionate about in financial terms or business terms, and so often our role sort of has us required to do that. Anyone on the call who has questions, please do put them in the chat. I think is the place to put them. That's where I can probably see, because there's some time for that if you do have some of your own questions around this really interesting topic. I maybe would like to go back to the panel in the interim though, and just say, what's that sort of a challenge or a tension that you faced when balancing commercial objectives with sustainability goals or impact goals? And I think we probably, all of us in this field, have grappled with this at times. And me just saying we've got to be able to frame it in commercial terms probably is the ultimate tension there. But yeah, I don't know, Georgie, have you got experience of this? And I loved your example of working with a big fossil fuel company just recently, and maybe that's a great one, because many people going into this field would maybe say, I didn't know I'd be working for a fossil fuel company in sustainable finance. But maybe that sort of trade-off that you've faced or challenges when you're sort of balancing commercial objectives with sustainability objectives. Any thoughts on that?
I think just generally, particularly in a time, even at the moment when you've got inflation going up, and there are just general pressures on businesses from a commercial perspective, I think there's just generally a tension between sustainability goals and or impact goals with commercial outcomes. And so particularly when you think of a company like ours, like Pollination, you think, oh, our company is actually going to want to spend money on improving their sustainability outcomes or their impact outcomes. There's also the additional tension when a lot of companies are going to have to do their ASRS reporting and they don't have the internal skills to do it themselves, and they're actually going to have to spend money on doing it. They might not have prepared to do it themselves. And so there's this great tension when they're going to be held liable particularly for reporting when they might not have prepared for it. What's really interesting though is, as you will all know, is we continue to reiterate, a lot of our managing directors who are out there in the field in a public sense continue to reiterate the importance of the linkages of commercial outcomes and sustainability outcomes, as you would all know, that they actually are interlinked, and they continue to be interlinked, particularly from a business perspective. And so that's what we continue to say to clients, that these are all interlinked, and if you don't look after the sustainability of your business, you will not continue to be a business in 10 years' time. And so that's it. There are tensions in the sort of short term in the minutiae, but overall it sort of is all interlinked, and yeah, that's sort of what we see.
Building on that, Georgie, because you mentioned the kind of evolution of climate disclosure reporting and mandatory, and so there's a great question here about what do you think the beginning of the AASB S2 disclosure regulations will have on the sustainable finance industry? Is that helpful to this sector, or what do you think will be the impact of that?
Personally, I think it will be helpful. I think there are a lot of companies, or we're seeing a lot of companies scrambling at the moment to get everything in line for disclosures. We're seeing a lot of companies coming to us for help at the moment, and don't have things, as I said before, prepared for those disclosures. And so there's a lot that need help right now, but I think it will overall help them understand their risk profiles to actually help them then actually implement and mitigate risk in the long term, which is a good thing.
How is it changing, and maybe Pablo or Alexander, how is that changing the nature of roles and careers in sustainable finance at the moment? Do you have any observations, Pablo, for example? Muted again. It is the end of the year, so we can forgive you for that.
Forgive me, yeah. It's only how many years after the pandemic and I'm still doing it. But anyway, look, I've had to do mandatory climate reporting in New Zealand and in the UK, and so I've seen how that evolves. And I think it's essential. So don't get me wrong, like this absolutely has to happen because the marketplace needs this information, probably not all of the information that's required within these disclosure frameworks, but they do need information on these issues, and it needs to be consistent and comparable, which it hasn't been historically. And it needs to be mandatory because it hasn't been good enough historically either when it was voluntary. However, I think there are real risks that it becomes a compliance ticker box exercise. And so you just wind up with people that their only job is to do climate reporting without actually understanding climate or what it means for the business and having any influence on climate and what it might mean for the business. And so my hope is that over time, good businesses that understand the absolute necessity of dealing with this enormous challenge and issue that we face in climate, will see it as a way of being able to drive better outcomes for their business and for their stakeholders and to communicate what they're doing. But we do need to be mindful that it can become a giant compliance tick the box exercise. And what has always been true in this space is that if all we do is the lowest common denominator in this area, we're never going to get to where we need to be. And so we need sustainability professionals, but business leaders as well to strive for better and strive for more. And so let's not have climate disclosure turn it into a lowest common denominator problem.
And there's certainly a bit of an observation in the market that the nature of certain jobs in ESG roles are shifting really heavily to being data collection roles, particularly around climate data, and you know, the ownership of climate disclosures has now shifted through the implementation of the AASB to the CFO, who has to ultimately report that up to the board. So it's become more within an accounting function. So that sort of shifted sometimes the positioning of the teams within a larger corporation too. So there is definitely a shift going on there, I think. There's a nice follow-up question that kind of relates to this, that when we consider the broader macro changes, so whether that's pushback on ESG and DEI in the US, it's the sustainability reporting landscape, where do we really see the roles, the opportunities for new roles in sustainable finance across different sectors? Do you have any sort of views on how that will shape the roles, particularly in the financial markets? And the question here speaks specifically to capital, like super, wealth manager, fund and investment managers. Alexandra, do you have a view on sort of where the nature of those roles might be heading, who might be really looking for people in these areas?
I mean, all of them.
Yeah.
My specialty is in financial advice, and they're all connected. And obviously within financial advice, they're not immune to all of these regulatory changes and the increasing climate risk and nature risk as well. And so I think, yeah, they're all interconnected. They're all going to see, I think, an uptick in demand for new people entering, and we need it because there is a gap. And I mean, I know from speaking to advisors that most of them aren't even aware of the climate risks and what have you. And whether you are an advisor that is providing sustainable investment advice, or whether you're a traditional investment advisor, that you need to know them. They're integral to your job, to protecting your clients. And so I think it's already very necessary, and the industry just needs to catch up, really. Yeah.
What do others think, Pablo?
Yeah, I'll just add to that to say that so there are increasingly specialist roles, so biodiversity leads, climate leads, instead of having the sort of jack of all trades, which was a lot of what we had in the past. That has good and bad implications to it, but it is a thing, and you're seeing increasingly funds have separate people along those lines. You're seeing, and I think this is quite an encouraging development, is specialists within other parts of the business. So it's no longer sitting within a responsible investment or a sustainable finance team at a bank, but you've got a ESG specialist sitting in risk management. You've got an ESG specialist sitting in legal, in oversight and audit. You're seeing those roles proliferate out in those other areas. You're seeing them within business banking. You're seeing them within consumer lending and banking. So I think that is a really powerful thing, because ultimately for this to be any good to anybody, it has to be implemented in the decisions that are being made by organizations each and every day. And so being embedded in the business is really a powerful thing. On DEI specifically, I think like that has historically, there's two sides to that. There's how an organization does that, and that is largely sat within HR for a lot of financial organizations. And then there's how you assess companies on it. And we are seeing that companies, particularly in the US, are just saying less about it. Does it mean that they've changed their practices? It does make the job of analyzing companies on sustainability harder if they're saying less because they're afraid of backlash. And so it certainly has made the job more difficult. And I would also just probably add that there is a lot of pressure to justify the value that are being created by roles. It used to, for a period, it was just more roles, because the workload just kept on increasing. Whereas I think now there is a genuine need to demonstrate that every role is adding value to the broader business. And so that's on the mind of a lot of people in senior sustainability roles, is how they ensure that they can do that.
Brilliant. So we're coming to kind of the last few minutes of our webinar today, and so I wanted to ask each of the panelists really to a bit of a sort of reflection, and maybe if you were starting your own career again today, what might you do differently, and what might be a piece of advice you'd give to someone in this audience? And perhaps Georgie, would you like to kick off with that one?
Yeah. I think I actually don't regret anything that I've done in my career to date. So I actually have loved every job I've had so far, and I've enjoyed my sort of wiggly path of where I've got to now. One thing that I would have probably done a bit differently is I probably would have studied more traditional finance, which might have helped me in my sort of ESG and sustainable finance parts of my career, to give me that solid basis. But I believe there's probably more sustainable finance based courses now available that actually would give you that combination of knowledge to help form that basis. And I think the advice I'd give people in the audience is to really follow your passions. That's what I've done in my career to date, and it's, it makes going to work every day a joy, and I love all of the work that I do because I'm following my values and my passions in what I do. Thanks, Simon.
Well said. That's lovely. Alexandra, how about you? Reflections on your sort of career and advice for the audience?
I think again, like I love the twists and turns that I've had as well, and to get here. And I think the thing that that's benefited the most out of everything I've ever done is focusing more, and what I would do again and more of is focusing on networking and meeting people in the industry. I would have a lot more coffee dates because hearing someone's lived experience is so much more valuable than what I ever saw in a textbook or what we ever get in a textbook. And that's also the way that you can perhaps get some kind of mentor as well, people that, will help you. I'll never ever forget the first day I ever met a fund manager, and this was 2015 or so, and that financial advisor that I was working for took me to speak to one, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed, but this fund manager explained things so beautifully, and I just really appreciate that experience to the point where I met that fund manager only a month ago for dinner, and 10 years later, and we're still doing this, and I just feel those relationships. It's also how I gained the role at Altiorum, because I was working with the Ethical Advisors Co-op, and an advisor through the co-op put my name forward to Pablo because of that networking, and because I'd been doing a lot of volunteering with the co-op and that kind of thing. So I really feel that, just putting it out there, meeting as many people as possible, and putting a hand up for these coffee dates, no matter how nervous you may be at first, it gets a lot easier, and it's been the most beneficial thing I've ever done.
And the great tip with that, Alexandra, is it's a super friendly community. So that, you know, like there's people willing to have that coffee date with you and share their experience, which is great. Yeah. Pablo, your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And I probably had too many coffees in my career, but I'll bet that's just me. But I think like I've made sort of more mistakes than I could ever count, but I wouldn't necessarily change anything because I think you learn from them. And I think one thing that you will come across in this space is that because it is changing all the time, and because we are trying to do something really transformational in the financial system, you're going to run against brick walls. You're going to make errors of judgment. You're going to get the pitch wrong, and just really try to learn from every single one of those, and then incorporate into the next time that you do it, and then you will get better. It's just the nature of things, and so I think that don't be discouraged if at first you don't succeed. It took me 2 years to go from talking about sustainability in my job for it to turn into a sustainability job within the same organization I was in. You've just got to be persistent, keep plugging away, keep getting better at the things that that you're working on, and it will come. And then in terms of one piece of advice I would give is look at the ecosystem. So I think everybody looks at superannuation funds and fund managers in this area. Banks have a lot of sustainability people. There are ESG research providers like MSCI and Sustainalytics that need analysts. If you're into corporate governance and that kind of nerdy stuff, there's Glass Lewis and ISS who need people to do proxy voting recommendations. There's the industry groups which have their own need for people. There's a constant need for people at organizations like RIA, IGCC. So don't just narrow your focus to a couple of small groups, really broaden it out. Think about the full ecosystem, because that's a pathway to then get into your perfect job in the future.
That's excellent. There's been so much in this conversation. Thank you very much to our panelists, Alexandra and Georgie and Pablo, and to those who wrote the expert guide, Georgie particularly leading that, and the help from the Altiorum team. I think, yeah, like connect with the networks, because there are a lot of friendly people out there, and don't forget that a lot of the skills you already have are very transferable to these areas. And, you know, continue to sort of push your way into this sector, because it needs more smart people willing to kind of analyze and research and communicate and convince. And there's certainly a really exciting and enjoyable future in this field, as you've heard today. So please do use the expert guide and share it around there. We'll be, no doubt, Altiorum will be posting that through the socials and LinkedIn. If you're not already a member or not already regularly using Altiorum, please get online. It's an amazing resource for all of us working in this sector. It has so many answers to so many questions and helps so much. So please do get on to Altiorum and sign up and become a member. And with that, we're right on time, and I'm going to say thanks again to you all for joining us. Really lovely to have you along right at the end of the year, busy time of year. So please have a good, safe summer, and thanks to our speakers again. So we'll sign off with that. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Simon, for hosting.
Thanks so much.
Have a good New Year.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone.